Timid, just doing another response to you, buddy. I see you say it doesn't say anywhere that you can ignore the mandatory unit/restrictions. I have to disagree with you again. Now, let's take a step back. I decided I'd go and pull out another one of those old books, the Bretonians that didn't get updated. In the Bretonians book, they have almost the exact same unit entry thing that I'm saying you have to ignore, and you're saying you don't ignore it. Hold on a sec, let me fix this resolution here. And you're saying, well, that doesn't give you, carte blanche to just go ahead and ignore those things like 1+ and yada yada. So in the Bretonians book, if you open up to the core section, they mention it a second time. It says, note that every Bretonian army must include at least one unit of Knights of the Realm. That's that 1+ restriction, the thing that we're talking about. If you go to the frequently asked questions for Bretonians, on the update, you'll see that down towards the bottom of the second page, it says on page 68 and 69, core units, ignore the second paragraph in the sidebar. So the second paragraph that says, note that every Bretonian army must include at least one unit of Knights of the Realm, that's to be ignored. The same is true for all those other armies that have any kind of 1+ restriction and or 0-1 restriction. They're removing restrictions, simply put. The italic section that you're talking about, where it says that you have to field an army that has, so many Nobbler, units for every ogre unit, that kind of thing that we're talking about. Again, I refer to page 134 in the basic rulebook, and it says some core units don't count towards minimum points you must spend on core units, sometimes written as do not count towards the minimum number of core units you must include or variation thereof. A variation would be you can't include any more of these units than any more of those units. Like in the Nobblar sense, you can't include any more Nobblars than you can Bulls. Or, indeed, the minimum number of units you must include in your army. That is where they're talking about, that italic section. If you look at newer books, that italic section isn't in italics anymore. It's written much clearer. A good example would be vampire counts. When you look at vampire counts and you look at the note section in the core, it's not in italics. It's just in regular print, but it does say that dire wolves do not count towards the minimum number of core units that are required. Just like the Nobblars have a note section that's, in this case, in italics, that stipulates a special circumstance. The basic rulebook says, in fact, such units don't count towards any category, just the points value of the army. So, again, just to restate this, I think it's been cleared up now over a couple of books on the 1+ restriction, and if the 1+ restriction is gone, which I think we covered, the same thing is true for the 0-1, because just like in the Ogre book, I said you ignore that entire page. That entire page had the instructions for what the 0-1 restrictions meant, what the 1+ restrictions meant. In the case of the Bretonians, they covered it twice, kind of by default, just because in the Ogre's book it's only covered once. It's only put into that page 67 at the top paragraph. But with Bretonians, they did cover it twice. They covered it once in the main composition list, and then once, in fact, on the core list, or the core page, the very first page of the core units. GW was kind enough to give us an example, though, that you do, in fact, ignore any of those +1 things that you have to put in. I think it's been beaten to death now. I think I've proven my case pretty well. If you still disagree, that's cool. Play it how you're going to play it. I think I could easily back up my statements very quickly if someone said, hey, that's not what they got rid of. I think it's pretty clear that that's what GW did in fact want to get rid of. They don't want to pigeonhole armies anymore because they realized that they kind of did that to some armies. Ogres especially were pigeonholed. You had 2 types of lists you ran if you were a tournament player, which I am. I mean, I've been to the grand tournaments. I've done really well. You can look me up on GW's website. It's not like a new thing to me. it's just something that I know, and I know where they're going with this. I mean, I'm not bragging or anything. It's just I'm trying to make my point is I've played this game a long time, have a fairly good concept of what GW does when they do things, and in this case it was pretty cut and dry. They were getting rid of all the old way that they did things and bringing in this new system. And for the most part, they've kind of been hinting at it with the additions of the most recent books. Vampire Counts and Empire and all the stuff that started coming out in 7th edition started getting rid of those 0 to 1 restrictions. You know, they started putting more heavy restrictions on that those units didn't mean anything as far as, well, if I just field a whole bunch of dire wolves, that fills my core requirements. Well, they got, you know, wise to that and said, well, no, we're not going to, you know, let people skate by and just take the minimum number of core units with the minimum number of points so they can load up on specials and rares. You know, so they did have certain restrictions in place. But now they're just backing away from that too. They've clearly pointed out, we don't care what you put in your list. We just want you to meet these points requirements. We don't care that you have to take one of these. That's done. You just bring whatever you want, make sure your points are to the right percentages, and play. Have a good time. Have fun. You know, they're really lightening up and making it a more enjoyable game versus a rules lawyer game. And I know how hard it can be to play a game that's just meant to be fun and not meant to be debated to death, which is kind of funny that this is turning into that debate. But again, I think I've proven the point pretty clearly that GW was in fact trying to stop pigeonholing. They didn't want certain armies to be stuck with certain list builds. They're doing away with it, and I'm thankful for it, because ogres at a competitive level are really stuck with 2 options, and those 2 options, they stink. You know, they're not anything that I want to be taking to a tournament anymore, especially with the way that the lists are designed to be built now. There's some other arguments that we could bring up on things that I think they have kind of left ogres out and drying about. It's the unit size limitations. That's one thing that I can't argue and say I don't see that that's fixed. For instance, Iron Guts, the maximum size unit can only be 16 models. That seems kind of crazy to me that they're really sticking a limit on how big a unit can be. I can't say for sure that this isn't covered, but I don't see that it's been ignored or been ratified by anything. It just is a simple, you can have 3 or 16 in one unit, period. End of dot. So that's the end of the argument. As far as Empire goes, differences of opinion, man. I mean, I can't say that I ever ran a competent Empire tournament list. That's mainly where my drive goes for playing. I would play competitively. You know, I'd go to the tournaments, the grand tournaments, show up, do my thing, play, hopefully win. If I didn't, okay. If I did, great. I just happen to be more proficient playing ogres in tournaments, and that's what I did. I played ogres. In casual games, occasionally I would play Empire. For me, detachments were a cool thing. On paper, again, this is on paper. I can't prove this without a shadow of doubt. To me, detachments look better. They look cooler. I could do more things with them. My mind's kind of churning on what strong points I could bring to the table with the detachment rules. You don't see the same battle tactics that I see. But to each their own. I'm not going to argue that one. It's just a matter of opinion on that one. There's no way that I can prove to you that the Empire is the best army out there because the detachments, yada yada. I'm not going to say they're the best army out there. But I think it's been cleared up. Hopefully the debate's over. Anyway, Timid, thanks for continuing to take this one on. I admire that. But hopefully we've reached the end. If not, let me know. Take it easy. Scrag 101 out of here.